Let me start by presenting some information to you, and I'll make a couple of introductory comments about recovery and why I'm so excited about it. The reason I think that this concept of recovery is such an exciting one, I actually think in 25 years of kind of doing the kind of work we've been talking about, that the most exciting concept I've heard about is recovery. And one reason is because recovery is something I think of as the great leveler. It's an idea that is almost immediately intelligible to many, many people in the general public, to people in policy and leadership positions, to people in positions of influence, in a way that talking about mental illness or psychiatric disability or that kind of thing is not necessarily making sense to people. And one reason for this is because the recovery movement, whether it involves recovery in terms of alcoholism, substance abuse, recovering from trauma, and so forth, is a movement that affects enormous numbers of people in our society. And the example I like to give is that in the United States Congress, every morning, you may not think very highly of what Congress does, I don't, but it's important, I guess. And I don't know what the analog for this is, in your parliamentary system. But every morning in the United States Congress, before any representatives or senators meet to plan or enact legislation, every single morning there are at least 3 recovery groups that occur in the Senate, and there's an analogous set of groups that occur in the House of Representatives, in which senators who have had problems with alcoholism or substance abuse and so forth and so on can go to a recovery group, can go to a meeting, as we say, okay? And my image is, what about in a few years if we had a peer support group in the United States Senate for people who happen to have struggled with mental health problems, okay? And in our political system, if somebody comes out and says that they've really struggled with severe depression, they generally lose the next election they run in, But if we could help people understand that recovery in terms of emotional difficulties, mental health problems, and so forth is exactly analogous to recovery from all of the conditions that we now accept that recovery is important in. I think it really is a great bridge builder to help the public understand both the similarities of psychiatric disability and also the potential of people, of service users, to get on with their lives. So I think that a lot of the kind of discriminatory behavior that we see in our society, and also the very low level of financial investment that the general public or legislators or policymakers are willing to make in mental health, is a direct effect of the fact that people think that if somebody has a mental illness, they can't recover. So it's a very powerful concept. There's one other reason why recovery is so important, and that is that the nature of recovery, when you're talking about recovery in terms of any condition that we're talking about, the nature of recovery really has 2 aspects to it. One is it's a highly unique, individualized, personal journey or process, okay? It's essentially individual, the process that you go through. And if we could just learn that in mental health, it would make an enormous difference about how we treated people, because we'd have to know really about the uniqueness of each individual before we could dare to imagine what their recovery process might be like, right? But the other magical piece, and it really is magical about recovery, is that you can never do it alone. Recovery is inherently a process in which people support each other. People who have been there in that particular condition support each other to move on with their lives. So it gets us away from our failure to treat people as individuals, like we talked about this morning, or uniquely, but it also gets us away from this mindset that we all learn in any clinical training program, which is your job is to look at the problems in this person and to fix this individual, okay, in a totally decontextualized way, in a way that doesn't use the knowledge, wisdom, experience of other people who have had similar problems and the experience of those individuals in coping and moving on in the personal support. So it's completely individual and unique, the recovery process, but it can never be done without the support of others who have been there. And I think because of that, it's a revolutionary concept in our field. Let me just, Bill Anthony, some of you know some of Bill Anthony's work. He's at Boston University. And he's done a lot of recent writing on recovery and also some of which is based on the research that we have about what helps people get better, people with psychiatric disabilities. And I just want to show you some of his basic assumptions that he writes about, because I think they can really help us think about recovery in a very practical way. One of the things we're learning is that recovery can occur without professional intervention. One of the things we've been sort of cheated out of in mental health systems is the fact that there's lots of folks who have kind of gotten disgusted with what they've gotten in mental health or not gotten, right? And have been smart enough or had the confidence or the courage at a particular point in their life to sneak out of the system, okay, and to find what they need somewhere else. And the problem for those of us who are still in the system, whether we're service users or supporters, is that we are deprived of the knowledge and the wisdom that those people have had by getting out and figuring out how to make it on their own. So some people will make it with a lot of support from peers or family. Some people will make it by finding a GP who will really listen to them in the community and help them really experiment with what medicines to take or not take. People will go to AA groups, and people figure out different ways to pursue their own recovery. And generally speaking, we don't have much contact with those folks. But the reality is, often the way we'll find folks like that is when people will come back and apply for jobs in mental health and say, you know, I've really kind of got my own act together, and now I want to kind of give something back to the folks that are still stuck in the system. And then we find out that a person has sort of escaped from the system, gotten their act together, and come back in. So there are little glimmers of that. But the bottom line is that recovery can occur without professional intervention. A common denominator of recovery is people who believe in and stand by the person in recovery. There's a wonderful study that was done by Courtney Harding and John Strauss from the University of Vermont and Yale, respectively, and published in the early 90s. Has anybody ever heard, how many people have heard of Courtney Harding or John Strauss? But anyway, this particular study, and it's written up in the Annals of General Psychiatry in 1993 or 4, appears, somewhere in there. He'll get the article for you. No, it's actually it's, you know, here's another thing I want to say. We'll take a little, can we have a little digression? A little quick digression? Okay.